Hey guys, what's going on? As you know, I'm doing a reading challenge. I'm trying to read 52 books this year. I got books 4, 5, and 6 right next to me. I think that puts me on pace, maybe a little behind, but I had a lot going on, so pace will increase. Per usual, I'm going to start with the one I like the least and go up to the one I like the most. But this time, once again, I liked them all. So starting off, we got The Pearl by John Steinbeck. I read Of Mice and Men, loved it. I read Grapes of Wrath, liked it. I read The Wayward Bus, didn't like it. The Pearl, I enjoyed. I mean, a book this small, you don't have to keep my attention for very long, and this one was pretty action-packed, never got bored. The moral of it was a little muddy for me, but it is set in a very poor village in Mexico. A couple wake up in their hut with their newborn baby and it gets stung by a scorpion. So they go to the town's doctor in the rich part of the village, and the doctor won't help them because they don't have any money. So they desperately go to the sea where they find the biggest, most beautiful pearl that anyone has ever seen. So then they go to the doctor, and the doctor is very happy to save their baby. And of course this pearl then leads them through a lot of misery and evil. So, you know, the moral of the story is your problems aren't solved by money. And money is the root of all evil, which we've all heard a billion times. But without that money in the first place, their baby would have died from the poison. And yeah, it all comes full circle in the end. No spoilers. You should read it. It's a good book. But that main theme for me was kind of a little muddy. I will say, however, one quote from this that stuck with me was, people say all the time that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that they're not at their best. They're not doing their best. But that's not true. Everyone is always doing their best. No matter what's going on, you're always doing your best. I'm not explaining that well, but hopefully it makes sense to you too. Okay, next up we got The Shrinking Man by Richard Matheson. I've been wanting to read Matheson for a long time, especially after listening to his son. He did a podcast. I'll link it in the description. But a lot of the quotes from that kind of rang very true with me about loneliness and being self-sufficient to a fault, which apparently Richard Matheson did. Looking at the cover here, it's just going to be very pulpy, you'd assume, right? And it was kind of, but it had a very well-developed emotional backstory that really surprised me. It was written in the 50s, and it's about a guy, as you may have guessed, that is shrinking. Most likely the inspiration for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. But this one is a very adult version of it. And yes, it starts off with him small, and I feel like the publisher demanded that he have more action in the books to fall in line with similar books that were being written at the time. So the action scenes with him and the spider, to me, are kind of flat, and they're kind of just read like stage direction. I wasn't into them. But what I did get into was the backstory woven through this book about when he was shrinking as a full-grown man, when he first discovered it. And, you know, you kind of gloss over that fact in your head, but that would be a death sentence if all of a sudden you're shrinking and you're just continuously shrinking. And he's talking to his wife about it, who kind of wants to bury her head in the sand, but he wants to talk about it. Like, what are we going to do? It really gets into some deep stuff about a man's worth, or really a person's worth. And when they would become smaller and less commanding, and they can't father their child the same way, and they can't satisfy the needs of a marriage in the same way, how that affects a man and belittles a man and really destroys a man. Which, of course, I was not expecting to read that kind of stuff in this novel, but I'm glad I did. I'm glad I picked this up. He emphasizes that a lot in this book. How do you say, satisfying a marriage, and how once he becomes a certain size, he is incapable of doing that. And he goes about 25 steps too far in modern day terms in his pursuit of that, which is why a lot of reviews were negative. But, you know, it's a different time. It's always interesting to see the completely unpublishable things that were published back then. So, big shocker here that this pulpy cover elicited that kind of response in me. Good book. But not the best book I read. Best book I read was a collection of short stories the best of fantasy and science fiction. Second volume. The first volume of this actually is kind of what got me back into reading about 8 years ago. I bought it on a whim and I read it on all my lunch breaks. So I thought it was a fitting return. Since I joined BookTube, I've heard a lot of names, a lot of like old science fiction authors, because I guess that's the channel. Those are the channels I hang around. So it was really great to finally have some context to authors like C.M. Kornbluth, who had this story, The Cosmic Expense Account, that could have been written last month. It was about an America that had been broken up into different warlords' territories. I don't think he used the word warlords. But these warlords ruled not through violence, but through mental manipulation. Essentially, that the Northeast was controlled by some sort of New Age health food yoga instructor. How relevant is that today? It's insane. Damon Knight, who I've read before. Jack Finney, who I've read before. All You Zombies by Robert Heinlein is a classic. I've read that like 3 times now. R.A. Lafferty, whose name I've heard a lot, had a story in here called Narrow Valley, which was completely absurd. And I was trying to look a little deeper into it, but it was too absurd. It was too absurd where you just like, has to all just be off the cuff with no underlying meaning. I'm sure I'm wrong there. I'm sure someone would be happy to tell me exactly what that story was about, and I'd be happy to listen. Robert Silverberg, who I've never read before, but I've seen all over the place, had a story called Sundance, which was incredible. Beautifully written. Pacing was incredible. I'd like to read more from him. Harlan Ellison, who had a very self-indulgent piece in here. I'm not a fan of Harlan Ellison. I know he was like the guy, but also his name is like copyrighted in here. I don't know if you can see that, but he's got like a registered trademark next to his name. Was that just like supposed to be a gaffe, or is he really have that big of a head? I don't know. Kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Lucius Shepard had a story in here called Salvador about, you know, a pseudo-Vietnam era that was devastating. That I read right before I went to sleep. I was reading it in bed and I couldn't go to sleep because it was in my head. It's haunting. Absolutely haunting. Gene Wolfe, who I read for the first time, and very like Robert Silverberg's, a great writer, just solid work, super entertaining. I was engaged the whole time. I got to read some Gene Wolfe as well. And the last story, there was a whole bunch of good ones that I don't have time to mention. But the last story in here was The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. Incredible. I just read it earlier today. Just a story that really hit with me because I've been thinking a lot just about meaning, which is a dangerous place to be. But how different ways in which people create meaning in their lives. And in The Paper Menagerie, the character's mother has a very unique way of creating meaning in her son's life. And he throws it aside, which is devastating when you think about how valuable meaning is in any form in this life. So, a reminder about the importance of family and meaning. And yeah, call your mom, I guess is what I'm saying. Alright, so those are the last 3 more good ones. I think I need to pick up the pace a little bit. I need to build some more bookshelves as well. I got the itch, the woodworker's itch. So more videos coming soon. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.